Hi everyone, happy Tuesday. Hope everyone had a great weekend. How was everyone's weekend? How y'all doing out there? Hold on, grab my book. Did anyone do anything fun? Try to get out of town this weekend, or do anything you wouldn't normally do at the era of the COVID? Yay, halfway through quarantine. Hooray! I literally just finished my quarantine. It is biggest pain in the ass, I get it. Very necessary, but yeah, you're almost there. You're almost there. Hello. Ah, wow, we got a crowd already. This is great. Um, yeah, so let's see. I was up in Poughkeepsie shooting with Tristan. We have some new video content uh, coming everyone's way soon. We actually just released a video this past weekend about basic thrusting mechanics, and we have another one coming up soon. Actually, a few more coming up soon, and I'll get to some, and then some other video stuff coming down soon too. So that'll be fun. Yeah, it was great weather this weekend. I got to do a lot of practice outdoors. I got to do a lot of messer this weekend, which felt really, really good. I love messer. So while we're waiting for any kind of late comer, I mean, it's only 3 after 7. So what we're going to be kind of going over today is a few things. The first of which, we are going to continue our exploration of medieval mindset um, with a little bit of, I'm not going to say full-on reading. It's not going to be like last time where there was me reading to camera. Because A, I didn't have time. I was actually shooting a lot of instructional material this weekend. But also, because I started kind of going through this, and I started sitting down to actually read it, and I realized I was just reading basically the book, and I don't feel completely comfortable doing that. But we will be doing a little bit of referencing this book, Sword Science and Society, German Martial Arts in the Middle Ages by Jamie A. Cutt. Additionally, I'll post a link to it soon. Let me actually do that right now. Um, so, one of the other things we're going to be talking about is how I can, or it's like a part of the Q&A or AMA kind of thing, is I want to hear from folks on how I can make these sessions better. And I have some ideas that I'm going to kind of present that are going to be a bit of a strategy change. Not schedule change, mind you, but a small strategy change. Um, and um, in kind of how we approach some of these AMAs. Uh, I can talk a little more about this later, but I think I'm just going to bring it up now real quick before we dive into stuff. One of the things I'm going to start doing is experimenting with kind of a flipped classroom situation in which I'll be posting content on the Facebook and the Discord, prefer Discord, but I know some folks don't use it. Um, um, so that will be, so yeah, I'll post as many places as possible, but I definitely um, what I'd like to really do is start doing, kind of, like I said, a kind of flipped, a kind of quasi-flipped classroom situation where I'll be posting materials for folks to review, either the videos to watch, or listen, or audio files to listen to, or reading assignments. If I had an ideal world, I would produce all three, kind of cover all the ways of learning. I'll see what I have time for. I'm working on a new project. That actually leads me into this next part. I am beginning to kind of produce a independent documentary that I'm seeking investors and production partners for. I'm not here asking for production partner help, but if you know people, let me know. But that being said, the subject of the documentary does deal with some conspiracy theories that are happening in the United States right now, and I'm just wanting to give people a heads up that there might be a time in which I will be taking a break from doing social media, not these videos or the Discord, but I might become less available on the Facebook and Twitter simply because the nature of the documentary and kind of that I'm going to be working on might lead me to have to kind of switch to this, this YouTube and Discord being my kind of primary ways of interacting with the outside world for just a little while. That being said, it's all hypothetical for now, but I'm really excited to be working on this documentary. People have probably seen little teases of it out there. I'm not going to go into too deep now because we're not here to talk about my film projects. We're here to talk about sword and sword-related things, right? So, that being said, just wanted to give everyone a heads up just because of those things. But also, so flipped classroom model, because I think it'll be good. Because one of the things that I would like to see, and this is really my fault, providing, just having an empty kind of question time, that void can be really difficult to come up with questions, you know? And even just the broad, like, bring questions next week, isn't necessarily going to help with that, right? What I'd like to do is kind of be able to provide material for people to kind of ingest and think about, and then bring questions. We can, and then what I envision this kind of going is during the AMA, we'll review. If it's a short thing, maybe I'll play the piece, during the screening, or we'll kind of mention the key points, and then we'll kind of have. I would be interested in discussing that kind of thing, and maybe. One of the other things I'm kind of considering doing is the way that I'm streaming this YouTube allows me to do screen capture, which is pretty cool. So, what might be fun is doing a Google Meet and talking about the material kind of in an open classroom environment, and I can broadcast that for people who want to be involved. That would be okay with being involved, either text on screen or picture and sound and some combination of such. Provide like a digital classroom while we're waiting to be in a real classroom. Because one of the things I'd like to start doing, even when we are able to return to a classroom environment where we're together, I would like to be able to record those classes and stream them and provide them to the internet, just much like we're doing here. The kind of share, to continue that digital share, because we have people that I have been contacted by people who are not in New York that really enjoy these sessions and seeing everyone's comments and kind of interacting in this way. It's been helpful and enlightening. And so I want to keep that rolling. And so when we're doing things in class, it'll be helpful to kind of, we can share things with the rest of the world or internet or whatnot. And additionally, I think that depending on how this kind of flipped classroom model goes, I'm also very interested in bringing it to our larger martial arts study. Creating content that will prepare people for the content of class, and being able to then kind of do our homework together in the class, our practice together in the class. I have some thoughts about how we can kind of do this. I want to make it more accessible. I know that we have a Teachable, and with the Patreon, we have additional kind of more philosophical things, working with Tristan in that way. But I do want to make a lot of this material available to people. So there's a lot of things to work out, but I think kind of experimenting with the idea of a flipped classroom model is very interesting to me. And I also think that we have the technology now, and we all have the mindset to do it. So if people have thoughts, opinions about this sort of thing, or thoughts, opinions, or concerns about approaching a model that way, but yeah, as Dina mentioned, like a classroom, more digital classroom model is something I'd like to bring to these AMAs. Um, I think it will be I think it'll be better for everyone. Um, and that's really why we're here. Right? So, that being said, it's about 10 after. I've rambled on a little bit, so I apologize. But so what we talked about last week was the idea of medieval mindsets, trying to part of our approach in dealing with the manuscripts, um, or readjusting how we approach some of the manuscripts, in so much that we need to, in order to kind of really understand what we're uh, understand the manuscripts, to really understand the manuscripts, we kind of have to put ourselves in the mindset of the people that wrote them, right? I think our ability to learn, our as a society, I mean, not our individual abilities, but our ability to teach and all that sort of thing, is certainly evolved over time and changed a lot over even the centuries, much like our language has, right? Um, uh, and so these are kind of little explorations of that. And so last week we discussed an article by Christian Tobler that discussed the idea of the four guards plus Sprachfenster, Vierlego und Sprachfenster, so 5 guards is kind of the 5 elements in medieval thought. Which, again, really interesting ideas. He even says it himself. Is this true? I don't know, but it's almost more interesting. It is very interesting to kind of apply these ideas, but also to the homework of having to kind of break down the, I don't want to say techniques, but the fencing parts, right? The elements that we were talking about, having to break that down and dissect them, is almost just as important, if not more important, than the actual legitimacy of the Vierlego and Sprachfenster as 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 elements, right? Or containing properties of elements. So, and if you didn't get a chance to read that, it's on the Discord. I believe it's on the Facebook. I don't remember, but there's a PDF of that floating around in our little education sphere. Don't publicly post it just because I don't know if it's publicly posted. It's from a book, but it is education. But in educational circles such as Facebook groups or Discord groups, it is educational, right? So please don't sue me, Mr. Tobler, or FBI. Please don't come take me away. So, the other thing, in addition to that, one of the reasons I find kind of putting ourselves in their shoes, like kind of the medieval mindset, interesting, is because it helps us decode a lot of the stuff in a very different way. One of the things that really brought me to the idea of a lot of the manuscript materials has to do with fencing and judicial dueling is the Talhofer text. Go to great lengths to describe judicial duels and how these techniques all kind of fit in with those things, but also how fencing is a part of the greater part of a person, that very classical idea of the body, mind, soul. Part of the body part is fencing, and the ability to duel. But of course, all of this has to do with all of this is from a very particular perspective. It's not just a medieval perspective, but it is from a privileged medieval perspective, right? These are all texts and books that were not written for the proletariat of the time. It was, in fact, all curated by and produced for the bourgeoisie. And so, therefore, we must assume a few, which leads me to assume a few things. A major assumption is the fact that these had specific purpose for a specific group of people, and additionally, it was probably not battlefield tactics, because other books have insinuated as much, that hunting is a better simulation for war than fencing ever would be, because of the campaign nature of hunting of the time. Additionally, rich people didn't fight wars. They still don't. You don't, like rich people are just not. We're not sent to war in any meaningful way. There are probably exceptions, and even in the trying to read those exceptions, you have to understand that we're also talking about a time that glorified people, and so there would probably be a lot of exaggerations about someone's participation in said battle. They might show up and kind of come in to do sweeps and cleans, but there's not, the wealthy are not being frontline infantry. So it is very unlikely that if materials were designed to be to be taught to the rich and wealthy, um, uh, um, uh, these these tactics were probably maybe used for later on in battles, one-on-one, with the rich people fighting over something, maybe. I have other thoughts about that. But if these things were specifically designed to be taught to the bourgeois, which they clearly are, it is unlikely that they were fighting to the death in war. They might have been. They were more likely fighting to the death or to the bloom, first blood or first injury, in the context of judicial dueling. There's a really good book, or interesting book. I'm not going to say it's good, because there's a lot of issues with it. But a book that talks about dueling, called Memoirs of Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. And it has an entire chapter about dueling and how kind of dueling was a moral panic of the 15th and 16th century. Beginning in probably the 14th, 15th century, the idea of dueling became a moral panic. Partially because dueling, under the has been a long European tradition, but also it became a more, it kind of had somehow crept in and maintained its hold in the European judicial system, and additionally, kind of, I would say, it was a slow phase out of popularity of judicial dueling, partially because of other forms of judicial determinants were really radically unfair or literally left to chance, or it describes a very popular alternative that was being offered to judicial dueling was getting a bunch of people together to scream in unison to declare innocence for someone, like a game show, like everyone yell for your favorite contestant kind of thing. Another of which is instead of dueling, two people would come together and ask the priest for some divine object, and a rod, I think, and so the two of them would sit before a priest, and the priest would go in the back and bring both of them a rod wrapped in a cloth, and they both take off the cloth, and one of them would have a cross in it, and that means that person was the winner of that argument. And as you can imagine, this also is either completely random or completely rigged. Anyway, so yes, so dueling was to a certain degree, by certain people who were allowed to do it, in some ways a preferred method of dealing with issues, but not really, because it was better to argue in front of a medieval court. Anyway, long story short, judicial dueling exists at the time, and it became a moral panic. And so the church and a lot of governments, not local, larger kingdoms, started to kind of phase it out, of course, for the poor people first, and then they were doing their best to kind of phase it out. It is actually mentioned in several documents how the Germans were the most resistant to the phase out of the judicial duel. In fact, there are forms of dueling still permitted in parts of Germany. We won't get into that. But, And Jamie A. Cook, bringing it back to our reading material, part of what is discussed is the idea that part of the way a lot of the Zettel had to do with the idea of combating the moral panic about fencing with a kind of science, with the idea that a fencing was a science, an art that is directly related to science. Kunst, more of craft or science of fencing. Uh, so Kunsteffekten is craft of fencing. It's the high, when it was referred to as art, it was the high art. Quick Kunst would be the probably more modern German. My modern German is not great, so yeah, so so what Akut talks a lot about in the book is scholasticism being used as the Zettel is actually uses a scholastic form of expression, and that is scholasticism in the most classical way, meaning in the most classical way, right? And so, what I would like to do today is just kind of dive into the book a little bit. For those you following along at home, I am currently on page 144, and I'll be jumping around a lot. I'm not going to be reading it word for word. This chapter we're going to begin is kind of information structure as evidence of scholasticism, and what Akut's talking about is the idea, the structure of the Zettel itself is formulated like a scholastic argument. It's important to note that Akut does talk a lot about, they do talk about, Lichtenauer's Zettel is clearly not an argument, meaning expecting to receive refutation. And therefore, we have to carefully apply these things. But mostly, it was a speech delivered to a potential student and therefore serving the purpose of inspiration, elucidation, and explanation. So, all right. So the idea was it's not an argument in the way that it's a back and forth, but it is a debate team laying it out kind of thing. Like this fencing and these components match up with these greater order things. How they viewed science, how they viewed greater craft and art, and these sorts of things. So what I want to do is because it is at the time a lot of legal arguments at the time were made in this way. So let us. But what does this mean? What does a scholastic argument look like? Let's dive in. So, in order, let's see. The function of the speech must be considered first, therefore subdividing the topics into sections. This means that the purpose of creating the work must be considered, and that in this light of the intended audience, their existing level of understanding as well as the outcome intended by the speaker. The end result is an order relating to the topic and substance, but following a universal template. There are 6 elements in total. The first of which is the introduction, Vorrede, relation of the fact, the division of the different circumstances and topics, the bringing forward of evidence, the finding fault with the action which has been done, and the conclusion. So, a lot of these headings probably sound pretty familiar to people who have read the Zettel and glosses. Huh? So Akut then goes on to kind of start talks about how the Zettel is kind of like a perfect. Thank you, Fencing for Life. For folks who are wondering what this is, Ko-Fi. I am currently teaching for tips. So click on over to this ko-fi.com/Peter J. Haas and drop me a tip if you like what I do. If you hate it, that's cool. And if you can't, that's cool too. Times are tough, and sit back and enjoy this and participate. The best you can do is participate, and I love it. All right. I know a lot of people have been providing a lot of really great content and I hope that we can one day achieve the ranks of great content. All right, so what we now get into is the idea of the introduction, which we all know is Junge Ritterlehrer, Gottliebe Haue Frauen ja Ära, so reicht dein Ära über Ritterschifte und Lehrer, Kunst die Dichtsere. Und in Kriegen sie Horfrit, Ringen Gutfässer, Graufen, Schwert und Messer, mannlich bederben. German has gotten so rusty, I'm sorry. Und in einer Händen verbaden. Essentially, young knights study to love God and treat women with dignity, thusly alter your own dignity, practice chivalry, and study the arts that exalt you, and in warfare truly glorifies you, will apprehend wrestling, lance, spear, sword, und Messer, long knife, the manfully exert, and in another's hands hurt. The introduction, it's basically how you should approach these things, right? How you should, what they're asking you to do is take this information and don't forget to treat the dames nicely and follow the Jesus, is basically what they're saying here. And also, you have to learn how to do these things well, and if you do them well, you will be greatly exalted. Again, exaltedness is a kind of language, to a certain degree, had more gravitas, because especially if it was written down and spoken and pre-constructed, was a higher order thing. And recorded was a kind of like a higher profit on that, or value, I guess, because it was done less frequently. There's even a really good sentence described here. This passage certainly serves as the introduction to the art of fencing. It sets up the purpose of study as well as building a picture of the kind of hierarchy of topics which finds themselves infused with knighthood. The instruction is delivered to the young knight, invoking a sense that the author was an instructor who oversaw the training of aristocratic apprentice warrior. Divination of the Christian faith and the notion of courtly love is established as the permanent purposes of the art of combat. And as we have already described earlier, in the book which you'll have to read, specifically capturing romanticism so popular amongst the Bavarian dukes and their propensity for Ritterromantik, knightly love, courtly love. Courtly love, Leanne says, courtly love is fucked up, but a significant improvement on rape and pillage. Yeah, actually, I don't know a lot about what they mean by courtly love. I assume it still has some type of misogynistic elements in which women are treated as capital. And so, Leanne, if you want to pop in an explanation, a brief explanation, I would be more than happy to read it aloud because it would help educate me as well. Okay, or please feel free to have at the Discord. All right, so there's some other stuff in between. The Vorreda appears at the beginning of many accounts of the Zettel, and might be said, and then there is a word missing on my print copy. Fallen Rock Publishing. Anyway, might be said to be the introductory piece for the student. It appears to be an introduction to Lichtenauer's other material, including Roschfechten, horse combat, and Kampffechten, armored foot combat, and supplies the wider context to the skills introduced to the rest of the verse. And let's see. So there we go. And like a few weeks ago, we talked about the Vorreda and kind of like the components of the Vorreda in our primary text that we've been kind of going over, the Udelev, and I believe it is in the von Danzig, especially the in St. George's Name book, but don't quote me on that. I don't have the ability to stand up right, get it off the bookshelf right now, otherwise I'm going to fall over. So then we go on to talk about the statement of facts. I'm going to kind of skip through the greater narratio. I'm not reading any of the Latin, by the way. I will not get into there. Leanne has popped in. Courtly love was the unrequited idealization. Idolized love a knight was supposed to feel for the lady of the house for whom he fought, who was categorically married and unavailable. Ah, I see. Thank you. Um, I think we should get. That would actually be a really interesting AMA episode, Leanne. Maybe we can do a Skype in or a video chat in at some point, and we can kind of. I would love to talk about kind of medieval relationship context stuff. That would be a lot of fun. So we should talk about that. So, in terms of back to the statement of facts, which is part of our scholastic argument, we then have, as we might, so in the Varede, the opening of this whole thing, and so as we might expect, we find fundamental concepts such as these: how and how not to strike, couplets 9 through 12, 14, 21 through 22, where to strike, principles of timing, mechanics, and precautions. Laying it all down for us, the most fundamentals, right? And then we get into the division of the argument, of which, of course, as we all know, the Zettel goes on to explain. In Lichtenauer Zettel, we find the latter in the form of this set of stanzas, subtitled as "Explaining the 5 Strikes and Other Techniques of Fencing." This exposition leads to the topics with stating that there are 5 strikes, which are performed from the right-hand side. There then follows the complete list of head words from which the entire substance of the Zettel may be then partitioned. So, as we know this text, Kronhau, Krump, Zornhau. Alright, I'm going to do my best to not completely mess all this up. But Zornhau, Krump, Ja, Hatschiller mit Schittler, Scheitler, Obervolsat, Nordkreis, Oberlauf, Hewlett, Dirkwets, Kutz, Dörflau, Absnet, Hinge, Wind Mitbursen, Irate, Zornhau, Krumpau, Zerhau, Schielhau, sorry, my brain, Schielhau, und Scheitelhau, and heavy parries, leave late, overlaps, cut last, shifting through, pull, pass overs, sever, press hands, decline, turn with openings. If you notice, there's very, very interesting and different description, kind of translation of these parts, which I will get into another week. But again, I actually quite agree with a lot of these translations and what they're trying to get us to do. The one thing that I always find interesting, it's always Krumpau. My tinfoil hat goes on with the Krumpau. It's the Krumpau, the word Krump in medieval German did not mean crooked. It meant weighted. And so I think that bears an investigation, but another time, and when we have people to work with. And so the list identifies the component parts of the speech, but for the function of the memory, it clarifies where the topics are located. This list establishes the reference and the palace of the memory to be constructed, providing the labeling system to deconstruct the body of the work. Right? So, and then it goes into the whats, the components, and the catalysts, which in itself is a really fascinating way of looking at this. Okay, and it actually explains a lot of why the Zettel feels, or the glosses feel so kind of all over the place. Why is it that so early on with the Zornhau, we're expected to know windings and what all these other parts are? It's not just that the people were reading it all the way through, but well, partially, yeah, it was because they already had the context. Things were being referenced. The mind palace was being told to be constructed, right? It's hyperlinks, medieval hyperlinks in a certain way, but also because a greater argument was being formed. And again, let me go through that again. So the what's, we have the fencing, all of the elements of fencing, which are, or the parts, the what's of fencing, the Zonhao, the Krumpao, the Zviachao, the Shielhao, and Scheitelhao. And then we have the components, right? And this fits in very interesting with kind of how I've been talking about these first parts of the Zettel. That is a very distinct way. It is an attempt to describe an action, right? The Stücke being described in the first 5 elements are possibly attempting to make a description of an action. This is a Zornhau. It's not trying to specifically build this massive tree completely, but it is in fact attempting to be like, well, this is a Zornhau, and this is why it's a Zornhau, and these are the different places where it works. Zviachau is, same thing. Krumpau, same thing. And then we have the components. How do you apply the fencing? And then, or the parts of fencing, right? And then we have the catalysts, which are the hangins and vindens. This structure of the art is shown in many of the glosses of Lichtenauer Zettel, particularly the Ringextema, which uses the viso as a tool to outline these topics explicitly. The viso is intended to define the problem space by reference, which the body of the content will address in its due course. And then there's the main speech. Now that the speaker has defined the topics to be discussed, he addresses each topic in turn in the sequence described by the partitio, by the index. It is described in the Codex Danzig, which talks about gloss. You will notice here named the rightful chief components of the Zettel of the longsword, as it is itself signified with particular names, therefore, that you know to conceive and understand. What we can then see in each item is covered and explained in detail in terms of the dissertation, and the supporting information is compiled, which supports the argument of the headword. Right? The Zonhao, Krumpao, Zviachau, Shielhao, Scheitelhao, and then etc. It goes on and kind of then describes everything. Right? Other items of these components are broken down further by the glossiers into subcomponents, not mentioned in the diviso of the Zettel, such as Krieg, Wirblossen, Brachten die Wirblossen, Fehler, Verhöcke, and Sprechfenster. Some glossateurs sought to further explain these subcomponents with their own captions and glosses, further breaking down the information supplied in the Zettel. Some also group information differently from the division, such as the Suda Fide Pandanzig, Lu, Ringextema, which describes them by grouping the strokes together, then separating the techniques. However, we may see that it still complies with the description of the controversial, the scholastic thought, that all statements are confined by some argument or other, either that by which is derived from persons or that was which deduced from circumstances. Now, of course, we come to the conclusion, which establishes the admissions which have been made or points out what may be established from it. As would be expected, the conclusion is designed to further summarize the argument and topics derived, and therefore this part potentially reveals most important features of Lichtenauer's argument. The material for Lichtenauer's conclusion focuses upon the division of the topics into windings and hangings, and how this actually encapsulates the entire art. The additional topics of declines, hangen, and turnings, winden, are the part of the conclusion, or the final summary of the art. Lu's revision of Lichtenauer's Zettel describes it as beschlungen, conclusion, closing. Beschlussen, about the couplets 105 through 108 about turning, winden, provide the precario, I don't know how to pronounce this Latin. It's not happening. Sorry. This hypothesis means that the position that winden is the fundamental catalyst for the human motion, as espoused by Lichtenauer and his witnesses. So that says a lot. That winden is supposed to actually be the core catalyst for all the things, which we kind of get this through Krieg, Edelkrieg. So that is not a horrible problem. So at that point. There is also a further explanation of scholasticism, in which we talk about substance, quantity, quality, relation, place, time, position, state, um, activity or activation, and then passivity or passion. I'm not going to go into all this because this goes on for many, many pages. And we will probably, what I'd like to do is kind of break this down and kind of dig into it more during different things. Though it is really, really great reading material, it talks kind of about how all the different parts of the Zettel, as we know it, all kind of fit into this argument. So we now, the structure has been defined as scholastic, and then we kind of get into the meaning of some of the scholastic stuff, scholastic principles, properties of the scholastic argument. Yeah, that's all I got in relation to this. Does anyone want to, I guess, any questions, comments, or conclusions? Or are there any what are the wheels that are turning in your head right now? Even if it's just broad questions or something you find interesting. I know that this book completely changed how I approached the study, because it brought me down this road of thinking with a medieval mindset. And it has really kind of colored how I relook and reread this material. This book is a dense read. It is a textbook. It is textbook prices, and it is certainly a textbook. Yeah, like I said, it completely changed how I approach this material. I think it's really, not everyone agrees with it. I think it's, again, I think it's great. But it's, I think, an interesting way of understanding why the cryptic verse was written the way, or these cryptic verses were written the way they were written. Also, at the time, it was kind of a big, important thing to have things feel like old, feel like it was part of like an older, longer heritage culture kind of thing, or secret knowledge from the old before times. And you see a resurgence of this, actually, interestingly enough, in another book I will recommend, kind of during the 19th century, there was like another interest in kind of rekindling these lost arts. You see this a lot with our modern conceits of Satanism, actually come from a lot of misconceptions in the 19th century. I think this is kind of very much part of European culture, is to always believe that the ancients had some type of magical knowledge that we have to find. It's actually a very popularized narrative in our even contemporary society, right? Like the idea, even you look at something like Indiana Jones in the movie, like Raiders of the Lost Ark or something, like you have this, like this idea of this older thing containing such vast knowledge, it'll literally melt your skin off if you look into it. I actually, Leanne, again, I would be really interested in maybe doing one of these sessions about talking about medieval philosophy, because I know so little about medieval philosophy. I would really, really love to have you on and do a Q&A about it. So let's talk. Like the idea that our society, even now, is always kind of looking back, like, oh, these old ancient writings and all this knowledge. One of the most insightful things that my Tristan, my teacher, talked about. He brought up this really great quote one day. We were talking about how he prefers to call his study of longsword Neues Kunsteffekten, kind of the modern interpretation, because he has kind of parsed down his understanding, right? His understanding of this material into what he believes is kind of the way to teach fencing. And his approach, which I've kind of taken to my Messer class, is don't seek the knowledge of the ancients. Seek what they sought. right? And what they saw was better fencing, or better sword science and how to kill each other. I'm going to go with fencing for now, based on the context of what we've been talking about. And so, I guess it's both like words of advice, but also like a warning of don't become too enamored in the idea that this previous culture was. It's weird because we both have this idea that previous cultures were both stupider, but also because ancient aliens or something were magical or some shit, or had some type of greater wisdom that's been lost to the ages. And that, don't get me wrong, great knowledge has been lost throughout all of history. But and probably we have giant gaps in historical knowledge for a number of reasons, colonialism being part of it. But I think the warning here is the idea of when it comes to trying to understand this material, that we should maybe not always be looking at word for word. Well, also because we can never understand word for word what they were trying to say. We should be more focused on the idea of what were they asking us to try to understand. And I think that is a big part of deconstructing Hema systems and understanding historical European martial arts, and a lens that I try to bring to it in my study, particularly of like longsword. People will see more of it with my Messer study because I really dig into that stuff way more. Even though I love longsword and I teach it and I understand it, Messer is really where my scholarly presence is right now. Yeah, so I try to bring that. So thank you, Tristan, for those words of wisdom. Yeah. So that being said, if there are any questions or comments or concerns, pop into the chat now or pop into the message now. I'm going to just talk a little bit about the next couple weeks. Again, as people who were here earlier heard me talk about or ramble on, want to kind of change the structure of these AMA sessions a little bit. That not being the schedule, still going to do Tuesday and for now Fridays, and maybe start doing Saturday. Like this Saturday, we're going to be doing an in-person class if we have good weather. More information about that coming out probably tomorrow and Thursday. But yes, there'll be probably some restructuring in terms of Friday, Saturday type of stuff, because I want to be able to offer more in-person classes, but also it is a lot for me to both teach a digital class on Friday and then an in-person class on Saturday. So more on that soon. Oh yeah, Dina brings up a good point. A reminder that Sword Squash is virtual and starts tomorrow till Sunday. Yay, Sword Squash. I've never been, and I hope to go someday. Is one of the great events. So I've been told. Everyone is super lovely and who runs it, and so yes, Sword Squash, even virtually, is probably going to be freaking awesome. Let's see. Yeah, so I'm going to be approaching some of this stuff with a flipped classroom approach, which means that I'll be providing material for people to study before class, and also material before class for reading, watching, listening to as a lead up to the class, in which we will then kind of summarize the material and also then discuss in probably a virtual classroom environment. Because I'm sure I'm tired of hearing myself talk for an hour, and I'm sure you're tired of it too. Yeah. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for a little bit of patience as we kind of ease into this model, simply because it's a lot of work to create the initial material for people to view and listen to, read. And so, again, some patience, but I will do my best to get it to you as soon as possible. I'm hoping to kind of set up on the blog, like we have a little blog going, longestsemester.com. Couldn't believe that was available, but it was, and it's ours now. some reading material, like some suggested reading books for people to pick up, and I will do my best to Xerox or scan or whatnot, whatever word we're using, to make facsimiles to post for people, because I know books, a lot of these things are like academic texts, so they're expensive. Additionally, I'm going to ask people to suggest topics and also help participate in these. I've been asking Leanne, especially because she's been able to contribute a lot in the text version of this chat today. I would love to get Leanne on to do like a virtual kind of presentation Q&A about medieval philosophy. And that leads me to the next thing, next week's homework. So surprise! I had this planned out, and there is homework for people. So that homework is going to be Kat Hamilton has been working on a piece. Some folks might have seen the survey that had been sent out a few weeks ago on various message boards and posts about practice and practice habits. And so next week, Kat will be Skyping in or digitally zooming in, messaging in, and what we're going to do is discuss her findings in this paper about practice habits, both the post-COVID, post and pre-COVID, over a variety of different disciplines, of which Hema is one of the disciplines discussed. And so what we're going to do is we're going to post a link to the PDF of the article. I'm going to ask that folks read it and come up with some questions for Kat to discuss. We will be doing a brief overview of some of the findings and kind of next week for folks who need a speedy catch-up or refresher. And then we'll be doing a little Q&A, and then I'll be turning it over to you folks. All right, and again, so what we'll be doing is I will post on a Google Calendar, which I will make available to everyone. Maybe the best thing to do is create a Google Classroom. Do people use that? I don't know. But I will post a link to a Google Meet. People can optionally join that way, or hop into the Discord, or here. It will be continued to be live streamed over the YouTube. I'm trying to figure out the best way to do a kind of a greater dissemination of all this stuff. It's YouTube just seems to be the best way. I also would like to kind of compile a catalog of all these because it's good to have. But yes, Leanne brings up a good point about starting a new thread on Discord for medieval studies rambling, which I think would be great. I also might make a little for suggested topics, and people want to volunteer. And, so people who want to volunteer, it could be about anything, right? We've done yoga, we've done medieval philosophy. We're getting into medieval philosophy. We're going to be doing this piece about discussing practice, and it could be anything tangentially related to Hema or the use of swords. And I'm going to do my best to try to get more guests onto our show, so to speak. But yeah, but for me, it's really important to see you folks bring stuff to everyone else, right? We're a group, we're a collective, we're a group, a bunch of students in this lifetime search for this martial art and sort of study of this martial art, and I think that there'll be, I think it'll be good. And so what I'll probably end up doing is adding a calendar to the longestsemester.com blog, and that way people can kind of see it. But again, just because the calendar events allow you to see the little meetup link, but I can share that through probably the Discord, because frankly, it's what it seems to be most available to people. Again, I am not really into the Facebook right now for a number of reasons, including some personal safety concerns regarding a project that I'm working on. So watch out for the blog, longestsemester.com, and check out stuff on the Discord. Dina brings up the point we have a longest semester Google Classroom. I think I deleted that because it just wasn't it was getting weird and complicated, and if not, I probably will delete it soon. But in preference for the blog, because it's easier to manage for me. Because I know it's still up and coming piece, but I have a gloss that I've written for a Messer textbook, kind of, that's in the works. And so I will probably be using the blog to kind of discuss a lot of that. Yeah. So that's just kind of what's been going on, what's kind of coming down the pipeline. So if you have stuff that you want to talk about, um, um, or want to volunteer to put on a presentation, or want to discuss something you're working on, let me know and let's air it. Let's get it out to the world, okay? And also feel free to send this invitation to other people outside of this group. One of the things I'm trying to do is I would love to have like Jess Finley or Kimmy Roseblade on this show or on this stream to talk about a lot of things, or Kaya to discuss their book. Yeah. So I think that with that, if there's no other questions, comments, or concerns, which I will leave a pause to let last-minute stuff trickle in. If not, it's about 8 o'clock now, so I will leave you to it. I really, really am excited to see what people kind of come up with, and I'm really looking forward to help bring it to the internet. Yeah, because this, I think we've done a pretty good job keeping up with the difficult times. Doing our best, right? So yeah, hit me with ideas, hit me with topics, and even if there's really basic Hema-related questions, like I want to go over Oberhow, or I have a question about Hasuji or edge alignment or something, let me know. All great stuff for these Q&As, because I would, yeah. Yeah, that's all I got. So thank you all for joining me, and I look forward to the questions, comments, and concerns, and I look forward to keeping the Hema rolling. All right, folks? Miss y'all, and again, I'll be hopefully seeing a bunch of you Friday for our digital class, and Saturday for our in-person class. If you bought Rat and Sticks and carrying socks, please show up, because they will be there. And miss y'all, and I'll see you soon. Bye.